Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so when I say Victorian era, what probably springs to mind for you? I'm guessing maybe foggy London streets.
Yeah, chimney smoke, very stiff upper lips, maybe some Dickensian poverty mixed with high society balls.
Exactly. Top hats, corsets, that whole, very British, very contained picture.
And look, that picture isn't wrong exactly. That London stereotype, the prudishness, the social codes, the double standards, it definitely existed. But it's like looking at a single ways and missing the entire ocean.
Hmm.
That 60-odd-year reign of Queen Victoria, 1837 to 1901, it wasn't some quaint historical period piece. It was, frankly, it was a global earthquake. It's the era that really hammered out the foundations of the interconnected, often messed up world we live in right now.
Okay, so if the London thing is just scratching the surface, what's the big takeaway? What defines this era on that global scale? Just how massive are we talking?
Scale is the absolute key. You have to grasp the sheer, almost unimaginable size of it first. Britain went from being, well, a significant European power to this, industrial and imperial behemoth. It gathered truly unprecedented power, unprecedented wealth.
Okay, give me some numbers, paint the picture.
Right, think about this. By 1901, the British Empire physically covered 1/5 of the entire land surface of the Earth. 1/5. And it ruled over nearly a quarter of all the people alive on the planet.
Wow.
So that old cliche, the sun never sets on the British Empire. It wasn't a boast, it was just a geographical fact. It was that big.
And crucially, this wasn't just about planting flags, was it? This period kicked off what historians call the first great wave of globalization.
How did that happen so fast? What was the tech driving it?
It was a total revolution in the physics of travel and communication. Suddenly, the world got much, much smaller. Transportation costs just plummeted. You had the steam engine, obviously applied to ships. It made ocean voyages predictable, faster, cheaper.
Right, no more waiting for the wind. Exactly. Then railways started crisscrossing continents, moving goods, and people inland like never before. And the other huge one, the telegraph.
Instant communication.
Near instantaneous, yeah. Suddenly, London's financial markets could react to news from Calcutta or New York in hours, not months. It knitted the world together economically in a way that was completely new.
Okay, so let's talk about the central idea we're exploring, the global mill. How did the Industrial Revolution happening in Britain feed off this massive empire, and vice versa? What was the actual loop?
It was a feedback loop, all right, a really aggressive, self-fueling one. Think of the factories in places like Manchester, the heart of the Industrial Revolution. They were hungry, insatiably hungry.
Hungry for what?
Two main things. First, they needed a constant, reliable, and cheap supply of raw materials.
Yeah.
Cotton, rubber, tin, you name it. Second, they were churning out finished goods at a staggering rate. They needed huge captive markets to sell all that stuff to.
So the empire wasn't just a status symbol. It was the supply closet and the customer base all rolled into one.
Precisely. The colonies supplied the raw materials. Think cotton from India and Egypt flooding into Manchester. And then those same colonies, often with their own local industries suppressed, became the captive markets forced to buy the finished British textiles, tools, whatever.
So you couldn't have one without the other. The factory boom needed the empire's resources and markets.
And the empire was justified, expanded, and policed by the Royal Navy, by the Army, partly to secure those resources and markets for British industry. They were completely codependent.
Okay, so the textile mill, that iconic symbol of the age, it becomes our metaphor, the global mill.
Yeah, a brutal, relentless, incredibly efficient machine. But it wasn't just processing cotton or iron. It was processing people. It was processing entire cultures, entire nations, grinding them up and spitting them out in a new shape.
And that's our mission in this deep dive, isn't it? To step inside that global mill, to meet three individuals flung across the globe, different cultures, different lives, but all caught in the gears of this same Victorian system.
That's right. We're going to meet a child laborer right in the engine room, the heart of the machine. Then a domestic servant in the grand colonial showroom. And finally, a traditional warrior watching his world get swallowed whole at the gates of this new global order.
Three very different people, continents apart, but all in their own ways Victorians, whether they'd ever heard of the Queen or not.
Absolutely. And our first stop has to be the belly of the beast itself, Manchester, around 1845.
Right, Manchester, mid-19th century. Forget cultured capital. This was the world's first industrial city. And arriving there apparently was just a full-on assault on your senses, starting with the air.
Oh, God, the air. Descriptions are unanimous. Thick, greasy, just grubby. Permanently hazy. The historian Lewis Mumford nailed it. He called the coal smoke the very incense of the new industrialism.
Incense implies something almost holy, but this sounds more like suffocation.
It was practically weaponized pollution. You're talking nearly 2,000 industrial chimneys just constantly belching soot, sulfur dioxide, all kinds of filth into the air nonstop. Novelists at the time called it a grimy manufacturing town plagued by foul air and thick smog. You couldn't escape it. It coated everything.
And the sound.
Forget bucolic birdsong. It was a constant, grinding, deafening roar. Loud, rough, industrial, the sound of machines that never, ever stopped. It wasn't a human soundscape. It was the sound of the mill itself.
This incredible, paradox emerges, doesn't it? On one hand, these factories are generating wealth on a scale humanity had literally never seen before, unprecedented national prosperity.
Yeah, for some.
Right. But on the other hand, the actual living conditions for the people making this wealth possible were, well, they were just appalling, utterly horrific.
That's the brutal trade-off, isn't it? This massive dislocation, as historians call it. England transformed, seemingly overnight, from mostly rural and agricultural to crammed urban and industrial. People flooded into cities like Manchester looking for work.
And the cities just weren't ready. No infrastructure.
None whatsoever. No proper sanitation, no clean water supply, housing thrown up cheap and fast. It created the perfect breeding ground, literally a petri dish for devastating epidemics. Cholera, typhus, smallpox. They just ripped through these new urban slums.
The statistics just stop you cold. Life expectancy figures from around 1840. If you were a farm laborer out in a relatively healthy rural county, you might expect to live to, 38?
Maybe, on a good run. But if you're a factory worker, say down the road in Liverpool, your average life expectancy crashed to just 15 years.
15, my God.
And that wasn't even the absolute worst. If you averaged it out for everyone living in Manchester in 1840, rich, poor, middle class, everybody, the average life expectancy was only 26.
26 years old.
That single number tells you everything about the human cost. This wasn't just progress. This was progress built on the absolute dehumanization of work, on endemic, horrific child labor, on pollution that choked the life out of people, and on cities where poverty, filth, and disease weren't bugs in the system. They were the system for the working class.
So let's drill down into that. What made living in these boom towns so lethal? You mentioned sanitation.
Yeah, or the complete lack of it. Imagine tens, hundreds of thousands of people crammed together with basically no sewers. Human waste, industrial effluent, animal waste from slaughterhouses, it all just piled up in the streets, seeped into the ground, contaminated the rivers people were often drinking from. The stench alone must have been unbearable, this thick miasma they talked about.
And our story is going to focus on one small life caught in this. A young girl, let's call her Mary, probably around 9 years old, maybe a pauper apprentice, basically sold into factory labor. And she lived in a notorious slum district called Angel Meadow.
Angel Meadow. And contemporaries, people who saw it firsthand, weren't mincing words. They called it a hellhole. Friedrich Engels, who knew a thing or two about poverty, famously described it as hell upon earth.
Yeah.
This isn't exaggeration for effect. It's in temporary description.
The details are just stomach-churning. You've got maybe 30,000 people jammed into these squalid back-to-back brick terraces. And the air wasn't just smoky. It was described as a potent cocktail of obnoxious aromas.
Because crammed right in amongst the houses, you had backyard piggeries, small knackers' yards, slaughterhouses, tanneries, even factories making catgut. All the stinking, rotting byproducts just mingled with the human waste. The alleyways were apparently often ankle-deep in muck and refuse. Just imagine the smell on a hot day.
And the housing itself?
Often cellars. Dank, dark cellars, sometimes 15 feet below street level. And if you were unlucky enough to live in a cellar next to one of the overflowing outdoor privies that shared toilets, the raw sewage would literally soak through the earth and run down your damn walls. And here's a detail that just it sums up the absolute rock bottom. In the crowded lodging houses, where multiple families or individuals crammed into single rooms, people often slept stark naked.
Naked? Why?
To try and keep their only set of clothes free from the lice that infested everything, they'd take off their clothes, hoping the lice stayed in the bedding, not on their garments. Imagine sleeping naked in a room full of strangers, just to maybe keep your clothes wearable.
That's a level of desperation that's hard to comprehend. And wait, there was that other detail about insects. Cockroaches.
Yeah, this is grim. Observers noted that cockroaches were sometimes actually welcomed by residents.
Welcomed. Cockroaches.
because they ate the bed bugs.
Yeah.
And bed bugs were apparently the more immediate, painful torment. So you reach a point where a cockroach infestation is seen as a net positive in your living space because they deal with an even worse pest. That's the benchmark of acceptable horror we're talking about.
And the name Angel Meadow. It sounds so peaceful, but the origin is incredibly bleak, isn't it?
Utterly bleak. It came from the adjacent paupers' burial ground, St. Michael's Flags. Something like 40,000 bodies were buried there, mostly the poor, the destitute, countless children.
And the ground became so saturated.
So saturated with decomposing bodies that back in the 1820s, people were literally digging up the grave soil, which was thick with human remains, and selling it off as fertilizer.
My God.
Yeah. The city eventually had to pave over the entire area with flagstones just to stop this gruesome trade in human compost. The legend was that angels guarded the graves of the children buried there. Hence, Angel Meadow. Bitter doesn't even begin to cover it.
So Mary, our 9-year-old, emerges from this hellhole, basically, and goes into the mill for her shift. 12 hours, typically.
12 hours was standard, sometimes longer. And the factory environment itself was another sensory nightmare.
How so?
Well, first, it was hot, deliberately kept hot, often over 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and very humid. That moisture stopped the cotton threads from snapping easily. Good for production, hellish for workers.
And the noise we mentioned earlier.
Deafening. Constant machinery roar. Apparently, workers developed quite complex sign language to communicate because shouting was useless. And the air inside wasn't just hot and wet. It was thick with cotton dust. Fly, they called it. Breathing that in hour after hour led inevitably to respiratory diseases like bisonosis, brown lung. That is, if you lived long enough to develop it.
And Mary's specific job capitalized on her size, right? She was a scavenger or a piecer. What did that actually mean?
It meant she was valuable because she was small and cheap. Children were preferred employees for certain tasks precisely for those reasons. As a piecer, she'd have to quickly retie any cotton threads that broke on the spinning machines. As a scavenger, and this is the truly terrifying part,
Go on.
her job was to dart underneath the massive, constantly moving, totally unguarded machinery, the spinning mules, the drawing frames, the thundering pieces of iron to pick up fallen scraps of cotton before they got tangled or wasted.
Darting under moving heavy machinery.
While it was operating, her small size was essential for squeezing into those gaps. It wasn't a job. It was basically a death sentence waiting to happen.
And it did happen. Regularly.
Far too regularly. We have accounts, like the documented death of a girl named Mary Richards. Similar age, similar job. Her apron strings got caught in the gears of a drawing frame.
Oh.
The machine didn't slow down. It just pulled her in, dragged her small body into the mechanism, and crushed her instantly.
That's just sickening. Was this seen as like a terrible accident or just the cost of doing business?
It was horrifying, yes, but it was also tragically predictable. It wasn't a freak accident. It was an almost inevitable outcome of forcing exhausted children to work around dangerous, unguarded machines for 12 hours straight.
The exhaustion must have been incredible.
Exactly. Records from the Manchester Infirmary around that time, say 1833, showed that something like 40% of all the accidents they treated were directly related to factories and mills. And guess when most of them happened?
Towards the end of the shift.
Bingo. When the kids were dead tired, clumsy, maybe losing focus for just a split second. That's all it took. The mill demanded efficiency. And Mary Richards' life, was part of the fuel for that efficiency.
And the cheap cotton cloth that cost Mary her life. It didn't stay in Manchester. It got bundled, shipped out. The global mill needed global markets.
Absolutely. That enormous expansion of production had to go somewhere. And that journey takes us straight from the engine room to the empire's glittering but deeply deceptive showroom.
So we leap forward a bit, maybe to 1870, and shift continents. From the soot and grime of Manchester to Calcutta, the capital of the British Raj in India, the jewel and the crown. If Manchester was the engine, Calcutta was presented as the grand showroom, right?
Yeah, opulent, imposing, but underneath that shiny surface, just as deeply contradictory, maybe even more so.
And the first thing you'd notice is the layout of the city itself. Segregation.
Rigid segregation, based almost entirely on race, on color. You had White Town, where the British lived and ruled, and Black Town, the much larger area where the Indian population resided.
White Town sounds like where they put on the big imperial show. You mentioned the architecture.
Oh, absolutely. Massive government buildings, grand colonial residences, and the ultimate statement, the Victoria Memorial, built later but conceived in this era. Huge, gleaming white marble, deliberately sourced to rival the Taj Mahal in this, like, bombastic fusion of styles. Italian Renaissance meets Mughal meets Islamic. It was basically shouting, "We're in charge now, and our grandeur surpasses anything you built before."
A very subtle message.
Not subtle at all. And the contrast with Blacktown, North Kolkata, is crucial. We need to be clear. Blacktown wasn't necessarily a slum like Angel Meadow. It was actually the vibrant commercial heart of the city.
Right, this is where the Indian merchants and bankers lived.
Exactly. Home to the great native families, as the British called them. Many Bengali merchants and financiers who had made enormous fortunes, often by working with or for the British East India Company and later the Raj. They were agents, intermediaries, bankers, hugely wealthy, culturally sophisticated people.
So the segregation wasn't really about money or even necessarily class in the Indian sense. It was purely about race.
Purely. You could be a millionaire Bengali intellectual living in a mansion, but you were still native, confined to Blacktown, and viewed by the ruling British, as one contemporary writer put it quite chillingly, as fundamentally unworthy of British regard. The hypocrisy is just baked into the foundations.
And that hypocrisy seeps right into the British homes in Whitetown, doesn't it? Which brings us to our second figure, the Ayah, the Indian nanny.
Ah, the Ayah, yes.
Yeah.
Her role wasn't just important, it was utterly indispensable. The entire colonial lifestyle, the very survival of British families in India, often depended directly on her.
To get why she was so crucial, we need to picture her employer first, right? The Mem Sahib.
The Mem Sahib, yes,
Yeah.
the British wife. Her job was basically to uphold European standards of domesticity and propriety in this completely alien environment, running a household that could easily have 20 or more servants, even for a relatively middle-class family.
And dealing with a climate they were totally unsuited for?
Totally. British women were actively encouraged, socially pressured, to wear the same damn clothes they'd wear in drizzly England. Tight corsets, multiple layers of petticoats, heavy fabrics, in the sweltering heat and humidity of Bengal. It was physically debilitating.
And dangerous, especially for children.
Extremely. Child mortality rates for European kids in India were often double what they were back in Europe. Disease, heat stroke, unfamiliar illnesses. The Mem Sahib was often terrified, isolated, and desperately reliant on local knowledge just to keep her children alive.
Enter the Ayah. Describe her role. It sounds like it went way beyond just minding the kids.
Oh, miles beyond. She provided essentially complete childcare. She often spent far more time with the British children than their own biological parents did. Think about the intimacy. She hand-fed them, massaged them with oils, bathed them, dressed them, told them stories, sang them lullabies in Hindi or Bengali.
Basically acting as a surrogate mother.
Functionally, yes. And if a child got sick, which happened constantly, the Ayah was the one sitting up all night, nursing them, applying local remedies, often sleeping on the floor by their cot. Her connection was profound.
And did her duties stop at the nursery door?
Often not. She frequently doubled as the Mem Sahib's personal maid, bringing her morning tea, helping her navigate the torturous process of getting dressed in all those layers, making the bed, tidying the room. Critically, she was also the source of essential advice on local customs, managing other servants, basic health and hygiene in that climate. The Mem Sahib depended on her for practical survival.
This creates this incredible paradox, doesn't it? The intimate other.
That's the term historians use, yeah. Because the entire edifice of the British Raj, the whole justification for being there, rested on this ideology of absolute racial superiority. The British were the rulers, the civilizers, the Indians were the ruled, the inferiors.
Yet in the most private, vulnerable space, the family home, the nursery, the British were utterly dependent on this supposedly inferior native woman.
Total dependence. It's the raw hypocrisy laid bare. And the relationship was fraught with this tension. Colonial guidebooks and Mem Sahib memoirs are full of advice on how to manage Keltais. Ayahs treat them like children, don't trust them too much, they're too soft with the white kids, they might teach them native ways.
So constant suspicion alongside total reliance.
Exactly. Mutual distrust alongside mutual, inescapable dependence. She was racially othered, but domestically central.
And what happened when the British family's tour of duty ended, when they went back home to England? Did the Ayah who raised their kids go with them?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
Especially if the children were still young. The Ayah might travel with the family to help settle them back in England, but even then the segregation was brutal. On the ship back,
Let me guess. First class for the family.
of course,
Yeah.
luxury cabins for the Mem Sahib, and the children she essentially raised. And the Ayah, She stayed on deck, literally, often housed in basic quarters near the crew or even the cargo holds, separated from the family she served, eating different food, enduring the weather.
Treated like baggage, basically, after years of intimate care.
Precisely. It starkly reveals her status.
Despite the intimacy, she was fundamentally seen as a servant, a serf to the British Chile, as some historians put it, disposable once her primary function was over. It was the presence of scores of servants like the Aya that allowed the British to maintain this illusion of effortless superiority, making the whole grubby business of empire seem respectable.
It really sanitized the exploitation.
Yeah.
And speaking of reducing humans to functions, there's one figure who maybe embodies that even more starkly. The Punkawala.
Ah, the punkawala, yes,
Wow.
a truly haunting symbol of colonial indolence and dehumanized labor.
His job, his only job, was what?
To pull a rope, all day and often all night. This rope was connected to a large ceiling fan, a punka, usually a heavy frame covered in cloth. His constant pulling created a breeze, cooling the room for the British occupants.
He was literally a human air conditioning unit. That's exactly what he was, reduced to a single, repetitive, almost hypnotic motion. Accounts describe them becoming so accustomed to it, they could doze off, maybe loop the rope around a toe, and keep pulling almost unconsciously. A living machine component whose entire existence was dedicated to the physical comfort of the colonizer. It perfectly distills that exploitative dynamic.
While the British were making themselves comfortable in India, using its resources, controlling its markets for goods made by girls like Mary, other nations were watching. They were seeing this combination of industrial might and imperial control, and they were drawing some pretty stark conclusions.
Absolutely. They saw the power of the global mill, and they realized with dawning horror that if they didn't build their own, they were next on the menu, which takes us across the sea again.
Okay, final stop. Tokyo, around 1880. Here, the Victorian era, this wave of Western industrial power, it didn't creep in like it did over centuries in India. It hit like a goddamn tsunami.
That's a good way to put it. A ferocious torrent. You have to remember, Japan had been deliberately sealed off from the world for over 200 years. A feudal society run by samurai warriors, largely unchanged, intentionally isolated.
Until the Americans showed up.
Until Commodore Matthew C. Perry sailed his squadron of steam-powered warships, the Japanese called them the Kurofune, the Black Ships, into Tokyo Bay in 1853. He didn't ask politely. He used the threat of overwhelming military force, the kind of force forged in those Manchester factories and demonstrated by the British Empire, to demand Japan open its ports to trade.
That must have been a profound shock to the system.
Huge, absolutely earth-shattering. The Japanese leadership, the shogunate, and the feudal lords looked at Perry's ships, looked at what was happening to China next door being carved up by Western powers, looked at India's subjugation, and they knew they were staring into the abyss.
They faced a choice, didn't they? Be colonized like India.
Or become strong enough to resist. To join the colonizers' club, essentially. They made this absolutely critical, revolutionary decision. We will not be colonized. Whatever it takes, we will build our own mill. We will modernize.
And that decision led directly to the Meiji Restoration in 1868.
Right. It was effectively a coup. A group of reformers, mostly younger samurai from outlying domains, overthrew the old shogunate, restored the Emperor Meiji to nominal power, and launched Japan on this path of frantic, desperate, top-down westernization.
They'd seen the West up close, hadn't they?
Many of the leaders had traveled abroad on missions. They saw the factories, the armies, the navies, the political systems, and they concluded cold-bloodedly that survival absolutely required the immediate implementation of Western ideas across the board. Technology, industry, military, government, education, everything.
The speed of change was just dizzying. That quote about feeling like you lived 400 years in one lifetime.
It captures the sheer velocity. They were compressing centuries of European development into mere decades. And to do that, they had to dismantle the old Japan completely. Which brings us to our third figure, the samurai, the warrior class that had been Japan for centuries.
And the new Meiji government, ironically often led by former samurai themselves, set about systematically destroying their own class. How?
Through a series of calculated, brutal blows. First, they abolished the feudal domains, the territories ruled by the daimyo lords, which were the samurai's power base and source of employment. Centralized government took over.
Okay, so their political power gone. What about economically?
Next came the hammer blow, the abolition of their hereditary stipends. For centuries, samurai had been paid stipends, usually in rice, just for being samurai. That was their income. The Meiji government phased these out. Suddenly, millions of samurai and their families faced unemployment, poverty. stripped to their traditional livelihood.
So no political power, no economic security. What about their core identity, their role as warriors?
That was the next target. In 1873, the government introduced universal conscription, a modern army based on drafted commoners trained by French and German advisors armed with rifles.
Making the samurai's traditional swordsmanship and warrior code obsolete.
Instantly obsolete on the battlefield. Why rely on an expensive, privileged warrior class when you could train up legions of peasant conscripts with guns? It completely undermined the samurai's entire reason for being.
And then the final insult, the symbolic erasure.
The Hatred Edict of 1876. The government banned the public wearing of swords. The katana, the literal soul of the samurai, the visible symbol of their status, their honor, their identity for centuries, was taken away.
Wow. So in less than a decade, they lost everything. Power, income, military purpose, even their defining symbol.
Everything. They were forced to adapt overnight, become bureaucrats in the new government, businessmen, teachers, farmers, or face destitution. Many couldn't cope.
And when some did rebel, like in the Satsuma Rebellion, led by the famous Saigu Takamori.
Ugh. Who crushed them? The new Imperial Japanese Army, the conscripts. Armed with Western rifles and tactics, it was the final, tragic proof. The age of the samurai was over, killed by the very Western-style modernity Japan was adopting to survive.
So imagine our now dispossessed, swordless samurai walking through Tokyo in, say, 1880. The city itself must have felt alien. This era of Bunmei Kaika civilization and enlightenment, what did that look like on the streets?
Sensory chaos. Absolute whiplash. He's walking on newly paved stone sidewalks instead of dirt paths. At night, there are flickering gas lamps where there used to be Piper lanterns. He sees imposing Western-style brick buildings going up banks, government offices. The first department store is often right next to traditional wooden houses and temples.
And the sound.
The clatter of horse-drawn trams, maybe the whistle and steam belch of a locomotive from the new railway line connecting Tokyo and Yokohama. And everywhere, the clatter of rickshaws pulled by men replacing the old palanquins and horses. It's the sound of frantic, imposed change.
The most visible sign of this cultural collision was probably fashion, right?
Well, definitely. It became this bizarre, sometimes hilarious mashup. Emperor Meiji himself set the tone, adopting European-style military uniforms for public appearances. Suddenly, Western suits, frock coats, bowler hats became symbols of modernity, progress, power.
So our samurai, probably still in his traditional kimono and maybe hakama trousers, feels like a ghost from another era.
Completely. And he's seeing Japanese men in traditional robes but wearing Western leather shoes and hats. Women in elegant kimonos, walking next to women struggling with Victorian bustles and corsets they could barely breathe in. Woodblock prints from the time capture this perfectly. It's a visual representation of a society trying to swallow a foreign culture whole very, very quickly.
There's that famous print, isn't there? A guy in a top hat and suit getting his hat knocked off by a girl playing hanatsuki, traditional Japanese badminton.
Exactly. It perfectly captures that awkward, slightly comical clash. But beneath the surface comedy, there was deep anxiety.
This wasn't just about adopting new clothes or technology.
Not at all. It was a forced cultural revolution, driven by fear, by the existential threat of colonization. It created this profound identity crisis. Sources say many Japanese were very conflicted, struggling with these new values, feeling they were fundamentally alien in origin. Some were apparently driven almost to madness by the pace and scale of change.
The writer Natsume Saseki captured that feeling, didn't he? That Japan was just copying the West.
Yeah, he felt it was a superficial, passive adoption. That Japan was bolting on Western forms, the factories, the army, the constitution, without truly digesting or internalizing the underlying spirit, simply because there was no time. The pressure was too intense. It had to be done for survival.
So our samurai isn't just seeing his own status disappear. He's watching his entire culture perform this painful act of almost self-erasure, trading its soul, its identity, for a place in the new global pecking order defined by the mill.
The soul exchange for national survival. And the machine they were frantically building looked disturbingly similar to the one that chewed up and spat out Mary Richards back in Manchester.
Okay, let's pull these three lives back together. Mary, the child worker in Manchester, crushed by the machinery making cheap cloth. The Aya in Calcutta, intimately bound to the colonial family yet rigidly segregated, managing the household that consumes those British goods.
Right.
And the samurai in Tokyo, stripped of his identity as his nation, desperately mimics the West to avoid India's fate. These aren't separate stories, are they? They're all cogs in the same global mill.
Absolutely connected. The threads are undeniable. That cheap cotton cloth that Mary died making in Manchester It was shipped directly to places like Calcutta.
Where the colonial system, propped up by servants like the Aya, ensured a captive market, often destroying local Indian weavers in the process.
Exactly. And then the sheer industrial and military power that system represented, forged in Manchester's factories,
Yep.
financed by colonial exploitation in places like Calcutta, that's the power that appeared as Perry's black ships off the coast of Japan.
Terrifying Tokyo into action.
Precisely. The future of the samurai is desperately trying to avoid the subjugation faced by the Aya, forces him down a path of rapid, brutal industrialization.
Which mirrors the same dehumanizing progress that killed Mary in the first place. It's a closed, vicious loop.
It really is.
So the Victorian era, it leaves this legacy that's far richer and frankly far darker than just Queen Victoria and foggy London. It's not just about power and wealth accumulation.
No, it's fundamentally about staggering social inequality on a global scale. It's about massive dislocation, people ripped from traditional lives. And it's defined by these profound double-standard sexual norms, yes, but even more powerfully, racial and economic double standards that treated vast swaths of humanity as fuel for the imperial machine.
It built unprecedented wealth for a few, but the cost, paid by people like Mary, the Aya, the samurai, was catastrophic.
And it fundamentally rewired the planet. Steamships, railways, telegraphs, they created the first truly interconnected global system. It violently tore down old worlds and laid the foundations for the globalized, interconnected, and still deeply unequal world we inhabit today. In a real sense, these three were among the very first global citizens, bound together by forces they couldn't control or even fully comprehend.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe a provocative question, particularly thinking about Japan's experience.
Yeah, think about this. The Victorian global mill essentially defined survival for nations outside the West as the forced adoption of a foreign machine, a foreign model. What is the long-term trauma, the psychic cost, for a culture that achieves national survival only by sacrificing its own deep-seated identity, its soul, for industrial necessity?
Did modernization have to mean that? Or was it the specific aggressive nature of this global system, the mill, that forced Japan into that corner?
Did it compel them to pay a price? This comprehensive loss of self that the Western nations who built the mill never had to face in the same way. That fundamental tension between the desperate need for survival in a Western-dominated world and the preservation of cultural integrity. That feels like a Victorian ghost that still haunts us. It's still playing out in international relations and cultural debates right now.